Chapter 7. Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson in 1962, had been discussed at length in the CTB, and on the whole dismissed as alarmist. The CTB staff believed that, provided they made the proper checks of the efficacy on side effects, their products would do much more good for mankind than the damage envisaged by Rachel Carson. After all, everyone's job was at stake. And we all knew of the Australian horse breeder who had threatened the group with legal action because one of its thoroughbreds had died after being dosed with one of our anthelmintics. Investigation eventually revealed that the horse had been given 100 times the dose recommended on the label of the product in question. So we reflected and moved on. I had come to the conclusion that the optimum length of an overseas trip was 3 weeks. And the number of trips I could effectively make each year would be 4. Domestically, this meant that Jane had ownership of the Hillman for 12 weeks a year, and then access to it on 40 weekends. So that was the 164 days a year by my calculation. Could be worse. Still, Tring and its shops were quite a distance away, and our boys were starting school there. Jane's and my parents had spent every available penny to give us private schooling, and, in principle, we were determined to do the same. In practice, however, we did not have the money. So Nigel started at Tring Primary School, a state enterprise run by a wonderful head teacher of the old school. Both Nigel and Patrick were lucky to start school there. Meanwhile, the world overseas did not stand still, and I had to visit it. Doug and his family were settling in Jos. Doug had recruited a young northerner to be his first rep, and Coopers in Australia had taken him in to train him there. Great idea. Meanwhile, I thought I should examine the potential for sales in other West African countries, such as the West Cameroons. It was November 1965. Doug drove me down to Lagos, and I went round to the relevant Nigerian government offices to get the required visa. I pushed my way through some swing doors at the back of the relevant hall. It was packed by lines of people, and about 3 officers at a counter at the end, slowly dealing with the demands. It seemed to me, if I queued for the rest of the day, I would still not reach the counter. I reported back to Doug. Now, there are some Europeans who never really manage to understand the part of Africa they live in. Others seem to collect an instinct and enjoyable confidence in their environment. Doug was one of the latter. He was about to demonstrate this in the most amazing way I ever witnessed and experienced in all my years living in and visiting Africa. He listened to me, and then said, "Okay, let's go round and see what we can do." He got to the outside of the visa hall. He looked through a gap in the doors, turned to me and said, "Okay, stay close behind, right close behind me." He took a deep breath, raised his arms and burst through the doors. The doors slammed back explosively against the walls. The counter staff and the many people ahead of us were startled, astonished. "Hey, you!" shouted Doug, all 5 foot 5 inches of him, as he shoved his way through the crowd towards the counter. "Yes, you!" he shouted at a particular officer. "I told you yesterday I was coming here today with this most important British consular representative who urgently needs a visa to do important work in the Cameroons for the Nigerian and British governments." My God, I thought, we should be imprisoned for life at best. At worst, we might be shot. What am I doing here? Why did I put myself in the hands of this lunatic? Jane and the children would be left husbandless and fatherless. We had now got to the counter, behind which stood the officer Doug was pointing at. He was not pleased. In fact, he was starting to get very angry as he stared down at this blustering, short Englishman. Slowly, he saw there was no fear in Doug's face, and he could see the wrinkles round his eyes from continual laughter. Now, a West African loves a con. A con for him is one of the most amusing incidents in life. Slowly, his furious face became uncertain, then almost pleased. What a con man! This would be something to talk about with his colleagues. Whether or not Doug had put a sizable banknote in my passport, I have no idea. Certainly, I never saw it. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my exporting life. My passport was stamped with the necessary visa, November 1965, and in no time we were out of the hall on our way back to our hotel. My visit to the Cameroons had been quite successful, bearing in mind the fact that the cattle numbers and therefore our sales potential were as yet small. There were only a few of us in the hotel at Douala, and the Prime Minister sent to inquire after my welfare. Now a serious problem had arisen. Pfizer, who were trying to move into our business, had taken all the Ghana government purchases of cattle dips. At the end of the day, if products and product service are similar, it comes down to people. I started some research. Who was responsible for the Ghana government decision? The Director of Veterinary Services, a Dr. Sidney Corti, had made the decision. Research produced the following information about Dr. Corti. He was probably the first African to have qualified as MRCVS, Master of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. The British qualification could only have been obtained by long, hard studies at a British university. He had barely qualified and settled into a veterinary practice in England when Kwame Nkrumah, the president of the newly independent Ghana, contacted him. Nkrumah appealed to Dr. Kwati as a loyal citizen to return to Ghana as Director of Veterinary Services to help build their new country. As a patriot, Dr. Kwati had felt duty-bound to do this, and now here he was in Accra, where he had just handed all our actual and potential business to Pfizer. I had met some of the senior Pfizer export execs. They tended to be of the same ilk, aged early 30s, tall and presentable, tough as teak. Doug and I talked this over, and he arranged for Dr. Kwati to meet Doug and me for dinner at the main hotel in Accra. Of course, like any father, Dr. Kwati was ambitious for his children and their education. I wondered what personal benefit, if any, he'd got from Pfizer, and in what currency. Ghanaian currency was almost unexchangeable with a hard currency. So my plan formed, and we started dinner. Dr. Kwati was a nice man, indeed a fine man. But my job, the success of my work, was at stake. So we neared the end of our meal, having drunk plenty of quality wine. I took a deep breath, and the conversation went something like this. "Sidney?" "Yes, Ian, old boy?" "Sidney, I'm surprised at you." "What do you mean, Ian, old boy?" "Well, it's all around town, you know." "What is?" "Well, that you're in the hands of the Americans, of Pfizer. You've given our business to Pfizer, and now you're in one another's pockets." Mentally, he went grey. I could see I'd struck the right note. "You know what Americans are like, Sidney? Big mouths. They've been telling everyone that they've collected your business by putting thank yous into your pocket. It's all around town." There was a pause. "Now, why don't you give us the business, Sidney? British people. British people you can trust to be quiet about any arrangements. I will arrange for our percentage to be credited to a sterling account for you in England, thus enabling you to educate your children there. You can trust me because I have the Wellcome Trust behind me, and I have their authority to say that they will guarantee your account. Just think what this will mean for your family." From that day onwards, all the Ghanaian veterinary purchases came from Coopers. Soon afterwards, the Pfizer senior exec for West Africa contacted me and offered me the job of managing a new Pfizer enterprise in Nigeria. I would be based at the pleasant town of Kaduna at 2,000 feet set against forested hills, and my total emoluments would amount almost to 3 times what Coopers were paying me. For some days I felt quite sick with the temptation. Then, don't be silly, they want you out of Coopers because you're giving them trouble. Then they'll dump you, pleasant though they've been. Reluctantly, I declined with thanks the Pfizer offer. At this time, BW decided the marketing concept which had just arrived from the USA was a concept that should be adopted. AAG asked ADR to form a strategic marketing, long-term planning department. Alongside this, ALM was to have his tactical marketing staff responsible for day-to-day export and overseas marketing. ADR asked me, the only person with a marketing qualification, to join him. At the same time that all this was going on, I went down with chickenpox. Our children had been going through it. I was pretty certain I'd never had it, but nothing was going to stop me saying goodnight to my children. It was most unpleasant. I convinced myself I'd never felt so ill. There were pox scabs everywhere, in my ears, up my nose, down my throat. Fortunately, Jane was immune, and she nursed us through it all. I am uncertain just how clear my thinking was to make a correct decision for my best long-term future. Anyway, I agreed to join ALM and sent my regrets to ADR. The Coopermatic was developing well. BW had a low-profile subsidiary company, Calmic, which marketed sanitizing fluids for toilets. Customers paid to have the dispensing system installed and then to have the sanitizer renewed every month by a Calmic engineer. This was widely used in public toilets in hotels, airports. The Calmic management and I talked about how the Coopermatic might be incorporated into their engineers' servicing calls. By good fortune, the Coopermatic aerosols, fly killer and deodorant, lasted a month or more. So, in UK for a start, Calmic and Cooper industrial departments started collaborating. This doubled the Coopermatic sales push in the UK, and we started looking overseas where Calmic had not been particularly strong. The products department was growing. I had now recruited Laurie Phillips, ex-advertising Coopermatic, Keith Matthews, ex-agriculture officer Uganda, Anthelmintics, Rod Must, BSc agriculture, cattle and sheep dips, John Saunders, ex-agriculture officer Tanzania, mineral feed supplements, Brian Walling, Cambridge economics graduate, industrial chemicals, Mike Crooks, foot and mouth disease, FMDV vaccine, a son of AAG, who was attached for us for a year. Rushbrook, who was attached to us direct from Berkhamsted School, was soon receiving complaints from my exec that he seemed to be useless, taking no initiatives as was required in our environment. So I had Rushbrook in and talked to him. I discovered he had been a music scholar, the piano and the bassoon, and also he had been a choir boy. My mind roved over my life as a choir boy in Canterbury. What do you learn as a choir boy? You learn to sing exactly what is written in front of you. Do you get any chance to take initiatives into unexplored territory? Never. I called a meeting and explained to the execs that Rushbrook would need to be given precise work to do. And so he proved to be a great success, achieving the results clearly specified as being required of him. Nothing would stop Laurie from developing the Coopermatic market worldwide. In Berkhamsted, chaired by the Product Development Manager Ken Johnson, committee meetings were held at regular intervals with representatives of CTB, sales departments, product departments, to progress requirements. The work was depressingly slow. I came to the conclusion that if you placed a request there, it would still be running around in 2 years' time, having made little progress. Laurie was having none of this. One day, to everyone's astonishment, he suddenly leapt onto the large table around which the committee was gathered. Shouting enthusiastically, with well-prepared visual aids, he laid onto the table the path of the work needed for his particular job, with a statement as to who had to do what and, most importantly, by when. Such behavior had never been seen before in CMR, but nobody could deny his infectious enthusiasm, and in no time he had the personal commitments of the relevant people to see that the work moved at the agreed timescale. On another occasion, I had hardly entered the senior executive's mess for lunch before a highly irate form was standing in front of me. It was the manager of our subsidiary printing company in Berkhamsted, Clunbury Press. "Is this Laurie Phillips one of your men?" he demanded. "Yes, why?" I asked. "Well, let me tell you, I've given instructions he's never to be allowed into my printing works again." He explained. One morning, into the print shop had strode a young man who shouted, "Stop! Take off whatever you're printing. What I have here must have top priority." The men had never seen this lad before, but assumed he must be a new PA to AAG or some such. So off the press came an important contract for the Ministry of Defence, and the men spent the rest of the morning printing new Coopermatic literature for Laurie. The manager was furious. He feared he might lose his MOD work, and indeed other government work.